This is the branding and trademark panel. And just like the last panel that I moderated on hindsight, what you would do differently now that you've opened your brewery and kind of move forward. This is kind of a topic quite close to my heart, geeking out about stuff like this with my colleague Trisha here, with my clients. It is a super interesting area, and I'm really excited to hear the diverse kind of positions and points of view from our panel. So the first person I mentioned here, Trisha Doré. Trisha is a registered trademark agent who has been practicing in the field of trademarks since 1989. She specializes in the preparation, filing, and prosecution of trademark applications and oppositions in both Canada and the USA. She recognized practice before the Canadian Intellectual Property Office and the United States Patent and Trademark Office. She specializes in trademark development, trademark availability, searching, trademark prosecution, and opposition. She advises clients on specific strategies in the development and evolution of trademark portfolios for both domestic and international clients. In other words, she knows her stuff. So please welcome Trisha. All right. Then we have the gentleman on the end there, Leif Miltenberger.
Your attention, please. The show starts in 1 minute.
Wow, we're just like actually ahead of schedule.
Okay. Thanks.
You guys are okay if I just go ahead, right? That's fine. Yeah, might as well. Okay. So we have Leif Miltenberger. So Leif is one of the founding partners at Hired Guns Creative, a design company focused on branding and packaging design for the alcohol industry. There you go. I was going to throw him love in his bio like in a couple of sentences, but we might as well just start right there. He does great work. Back in 2008, Leif founded Hired Guns with Richard Hatter, who is now the creative director. After running Hired Guns for a couple of years as a general design company, they landed in the wonderful world of designing for the alcohol industry and decided to focus their company and specialize in that niche. And as anyone who has seen their gorgeous industry-leading work for brands like Driftwood, Backcountry, and Andina, it's pretty clear that was a pretty good choice. So these days, Leif's time is primarily spent on business development for Hired Guns. Please welcome Leif. Okay. And then we have the bringer of beer, Mr. Ben Reeder. Ben is the marketing manager and co-founder at Backcountry Brewing. After graduating from BCIT, a marketing management program, and a few years of working for the man, Ben started his first company, opening a video production company in Vancouver. Open Studios has been running strong for 18 years now. Then, in 2013, came Maple Bay Hop Farm on Vancouver Island, where his journey into beer really began. After trying to open a brewery on his farm, Ben quickly pivoted to a more realistic goal of finding a team to do this closer to home on the mainland. Since 2017, it's been all about beer all the time for Ben. Please welcome Ben. Okay. So, I'm going to start off with a question for you, Ben. About since you've just shown up and just dropped it down here, these beautifully designed cans, and I got a sense of who you work with. How did you come to choose a branding company?
That's a good question. We started out by trying to do it ourselves for a bit, not knowing the testing. We tried to do it ourselves for a bit. I made another logo for Maple Bay, and it wasn't too hard. But quickly we realized that, this is a bigger animal than we can bite off. We tried a few logos, and all of them seemed to have a mountainscape in it, and that was just done by everybody in Squamish already. And so, after discussing with the team, we were like, well, let's see who the best of the business is and what they're doing and what we can get from them. And we realized after a lot of discussions how important your logo is to start, and it's going to be there every day. It's going to be on a million different things. It's going to be on your underwear, your socks, everywhere. So we looked at a few different options. We came to the consensus that we wanted something that had illustration in it, and it wasn't just this new style of just words and fonts and minimalism. We didn't want to kind of fall into that track because I think we were just kind of wanted some more exciting art on our cans, and didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves into this minimalist style. So we looked at some great people in the industry and had them give us proposals. And then we went with Hired Guns in the end because they had the artists that we wanted, and they showed in their other work that they could do pretty much anything. And I think it was Richard, what he said, that he's like a chameleon, and that was what we wanted. We wanted a chameleon, someone who could do an artistic rendition of an animal, or go and do any style, really. So that's what made us go with Hired Guns in the end.
Nice. And so, the next question is one that I think both Trisha and Leif can touch on in their own way, from their own vantage point. Is a client comes to you with a name, with a design, and how do you ensure that that name and design aren't infringing on someone else's intellectual property rights?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, the first place we start is probably what a lot of you guys do, Google, right? So, if you've got a name for a beer or a brewery, Google the shit out of it, right? You want to hit Untapped. You want to go on a rate beer. You want to hit those trademark searches that are available to the public, both in Canada and the United States. But I also find different approaches to Googling can be really useful, like Google image search, for example. Google image search the name of your brewery or the name of your beer and see what comes up. And then also just describe the idea you have for a label and search that in the trademarks or on Untapped. If you're doing a Purple Eagle label, search for Purple Eagle beer in all of those places I mentioned and see what comes up. Another thing that we do is we like to get off of the computers when looking for source images, specifically books, specifically older books, public domain stuff. That's been really, really key for us in avoiding creating artwork that infringes on other people's IP. And then the third way that we try and steer clear of IP difficulties is with a really strong, distinct artwork style that is unlikely to be copied, unlikely to be copyable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Those are all great things, and those are all things that I wish most of our clients would tell me before they come and ask us to do availability searches, because you can save a lot of time and you can save a lot of money by using some of the free resources that are out there that Leif just mentioned, and that's great, because there's a lot of people that don't do that. And they'll come to us after they've put it on a label, or they'll come to us after they've spent money on the artwork or something else, and they'll say, they're already married to it. And then they come to us and we do an availability search, which, takes us time. We've got to order sophisticated reports. We use the public databases as well. Just one thing to expand on what Leif said on the free databases that are out there. The trademarks offices in both Canada and the United States have databases that you can plunk in words and see if there's any direct hits. And we recommend that you do that first, because if there's an obvious, what we call knockout, you can find that out yourself without coming to us and engaging us in us going on to our databases that we pay for that have a little bit more sophisticated search engines. And I always say they're free for a reason. We subscribe to databases that have, they do cross-referencing, they do phonetic equivalence and things like that. You won't get that from the trademarks office databases. So often Carlos will come to me when a client comes through the door and says, can you do a quick knockout search for me? And it's like, less than 2 minutes. And I can give Carlos a pretty good quick overview, and then Carlos will go back to the client, give them a bit of information and say, now, if you want to move forward with it, then we recommend that you do a more in-depth search, especially if it's going to be your house brand. And that's probably one thing, Leif, when you've got clients that are coming in. Your house brand is something you don't want to have any problems with. It's the mark that you want to be the cleanest, because that's what everybody's going to recognize you as in the marketplace.
Yeah, and it's going to be more expensive to change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the longer you wait to register your house brand, or the more problems that it looks like you're going to have, the best advice I give clients is move on to another mark. Because the reality is, it's more time for us and it's more money, and Leif would have to do another design again, but that's not what we want to do. We want to prevent problems for everybody from the get-go. So those are kind of the basics, and you know, you can build on that. And we've got some clients that have a whole portfolio of trademarks, and what they do is they categorize them like, this is our house brand number one. Then these are sub brands that if we had to filter them out and we had problems with, that's fine. We can get rid of them if we have to. So you prioritize your marks, do your initial searching through the free databases and through Google, then you come and see us and make sure there's no problems.
Yeah. Sorry, just a quick follow-up. We're at the point now with especially with startup breweries where I'm really, really hesitant to start on any design whatsoever until they've at least had a lawyer do a preliminary knockout search.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing that Leif mentioned was, where you're deriving your artwork from. We've had some people that have come to us, and there's this misconception that if you get it off of freeware or clip art, I mean, those are all old terms, but the probability of there being a problem rises dramatically. And there's some graphic artists that think that if they just tinker with some designs, that's enough to make it unique, or that there's ownership there. So you have to be careful. Like when we send out draft applications, we have a whole paragraph that says, is this original? Did you derive inspiration from anywhere else? If you took this from a book, or if you took this from somewhere that there was copyright, then you're going to have issues with it. And somebody may not be the wiser. You could go ahead and get the registration, then all of a sudden somebody petitions to cancel it because somebody owns a copyright. So you have to be careful where you're cutting your artwork from. And you can probably expand on that.
I will later.
Okay.
Yeah. And so one thing I can kind of chime in on that I found a lot, that surprisingly is one of the most emotionally challenging discussions to have in the first couple of months that I'm working with a brewery, is their name. And one of the most common things that comes to me is I get an email from ben@readerbrewing.com. And they come to me and they're like, look at this logo, it's amazing. Like, my wife's working on t-shirts and she does a designer. It's like, oh, it's so really cool. And then I called Trisha and she's like, no, we can't use that name. And that is so hard. And I've had a lot of people who've had gone through multiple names. So for anybody who's looking to go into this space, please come up with a few names. Try not to get emotionally attached. I had one client who had a name that looked great, but there was a registration which was owned by Labatt in the Newfoundland trademark database, trademark registry. And so when Newfoundland joined Confederation, all those registrations came into Canada. It's been sitting there for, when did they join Confederation? 1949, 48? And just it was owned by Labatt. So just the process of getting that and using that name was just like, it's just not worth it. And so going through the process of trying not to get emotionally attached to a name is also something that I think is pretty important.
There's a handout, Dulcie Campos from our office is floating around the room, and we brought a handout called Creating a Mighty Brand, and it's things to think about when you're coming up with the conceptual stages of a mark. So if you want one, I'll get Dulcie to float around. She's right at the back there. She can float around and pass them out.
Okay. So on that point of registration, a lot of people can't afford to register everything. I always say start off with your name. If your logo is really important, move to that, core brands and whatnot. Some people have heard that you don't have to register. You have some rights outside of registration. So Trisha, could you speak to the benefits of registering a trademark versus proceeding without an actual registration?
Sure. You've got some common law rights through use of the mark, but those common law rights are restricted to your jurisdiction of business. So, and I was talking to somebody out on the floor here, they had the TM symbol on their mark, and he's obviously going through the registration process, and before he knew what I did, he said, well, it's our trademark, but it's not registered yet. We're halfway through the process. And so he said, once that's registered, I can change that to the R in the circle. And I said, yeah, that's right. That's exactly what you can do. So there's a small nuance between a TM and a registered symbol. You can put a TM symbol on anything that you've created, just like the copyright, and I'm sure Leif can speak to that as well. But once the mark is registered, then you can change it to the R in the circle, and that's a federal registration. So all trademarks in Canada are federal. So once you get that trademark registration, you're protected in all provinces, notwithstanding you may only be using it in British Columbia. And also it's a good warning to people who are looking to register marks and looking, whether to register or to use marks, that it's proof of ownership and it's a notification, for lack of a better description. So if you go ahead and use marks, especially your house mark, mark, I'm going to go back to the comment that I just made. Your house mark's your most important mark. You want to make sure it's clear you've got no problems and you've got that mark registered. Then you can look at your secondary brands and decide, is it going to be a brand that's going to stand the test of time, and decide whether or not you want to rely on common law rights. But, over time you may forget, and you may be using something without a registration. So as boring as it sounds, we recommend on an annual basis you pull out your registrations and see what you've got registered, what you're using, and what's important. And if a mark's moved up on the scale, then think about registering it. And once you file an application, if you've been using it, you can claim a date of first use, and you've got common law rights going back to that claim date of first use. So that's another thing, is if you're only using marks without a registration, keep really good records. And your graphics people are generally the best people. You probably create electronic files. Yeah.
And so, speaking of that mark, that key logo. So this is something I'm sure Ben and Leif, you can speak to. Tell us the story of getting to that logo, what the importance was for you, and what kind of thinking went into it for the Backcountry logo.
Well, it started with I think a 30-page document from Leif, where we filled out where we wanted our mark to be, sit on a circle, and how we would position ourselves in the community and what sort of vibe, and basically almost the same question 30 ways. But we did our best to answer, and actually I think the most successful thing we've ever done is the logo came through and hit the mark like perfectly. Somehow, actually a funny story is that in the brewery at the time we had nothing in the brewery but an axe, some wood, and 3 oil lanterns, and they'd come from one from my mom, one from my farm, and we thought that Leif must have seen a picture of this, and we had them up at our display at the Squamish Beer Fest when we didn't have any beer, but we had stickers. And I look back, there's no pictures of the lantern, and my buddies at the farm were like, "We gave you your logo, haha." But no, it was just that document, the input survey. That's the difference between a really professional branding group and some of the other people, is that they're getting the goods out of you, and that's basically that back and forth. I think we gave you like some songs we had written as well, like a rap that we had written. That was a rap. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's supposed to be. Yeah, yeah. We'll dig it up after. It's not great, but white guys doing rap, right? But we had the logo came through, and we voted on it, and I think we had Mark was a little bit of a holdout because he had to talk to his dad about it, but no, it was basically absolutely perfect. We wanted something that was timeless, classic, simple, obviously something that can go on to small little things like these little tags and buttons, something bold and that works well with black and white, and then also with colors. So yeah, it was, I can only wish all of you guys the same success that we had, because it's the most important thing that I think you'll do is picking your name, and then the logo are the 2 key things to go on, and then have fun with beer names.
All right, yourself, Leif?
So Ben, you kind of said everything I was going to say there. Other than we've pared that intake survey down lately. It's not 30 pages anymore, but I find that is a really important part in the process, to try and get everything out of our clients' heads and down onto paper before we start working on a project, rather than trying to figure it all out as we go through the project. And some designers work that way and it works for them. That method does not work for us. So we just want to understand what they're after before we start. And then, yeah, you kind of covered everything else I was going to say, including the rap.
So in the process, Trisha, when would you start thinking about research and the registration process? So if you're starting a brewery, you're looking to get going, when should you turn your mind to that?
Well, some people will come to us before they, as you know, Carlos, will come to us before they even do their incorporation because they want their corporate entity to incorporate whatever the distinctive element is in their main brand. Sometimes that can hold up the incorporation because if they're choosing marks that there's difficulties with and they're having to go back to the drawing board. I guess one thing I can say, and Carlos, you can jump in correct me if you think I'm wrong. But if it's holding up the incorporation and that incorporation is preventing you from doing other things like signing a lease or getting your banking going or something like that, just choose a numbered company or something like that, and you can always do a name change after that, and it's not too terribly difficult to do a name change. But if it's going to hold you up to that extent, then get that incorporation done and then move on with the branding. But to go more specifically to Carlos's question, and anybody in the room or any of my clients that are in the room, I've already spoken to one already, the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, which is the governing body that regulates and does all the registration of trademarks and patents in Canada, they are at an all-time historical low for turnaround time, for quality control. So when Carlos and I were talking about this panel today, my answer to clients on that question is you should have done it 6 months ago if you think that you're going to start the incorporation and get this going, because from the time you file a trademark application till the time an examiner even looks at it, right now it is 12 to 14 months. And that's your first step in the application process. And that's another reason why searching is very important before you file your application, because we're dealing with the government as a government process, and they work at a government's pace. Then you throw into it that, and some of you in the room may have heard this, that we think, the Act was changed in 4 years ago, and it still has yet to be implemented in the Trademarks Office. So there are some changes under Bill C-31 which have not yet been implemented, and the Canadian Trademarks Office has very archaic systems. We always joke in our office that their youngest programmer is 57, which if any of you know anything about computer software, that is like beyond, that's your great-grandparents that are doing the programming and any of it. So to answer the question, you should be thinking about it way sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the steps that first steps we talk about incorporation, because people come to me sometimes and like, we found a great space, what do we do? And I'm like, okay, well, you probably shouldn't sign the lease in your own name. You probably should have a company and do all this stuff. And if you're not going to do a very complex structure and take advantage of like the EBC credit program, you can do this relatively quick. Then get a numbered company, apply, and then go through your trademarks process. Obviously, it's very nice to have all those things together, but chances are you won't. And it's never going to be bulletproof. There's very great discrepancy, as Trisha said, in the quality of examiners right now, and it's causing us tons of headaches, it's causing our clients tons of headaches. But it's a bunch of bureaucrats off in Ottawa, and you got to live with the system. So, I think it's the earlier the better. And like we said, go into a robust process of due diligence beforehand to try and make sure that you can knock as much stuff off as you can, find the strongest name. That'll
just
be very
on that
helpful.
point, just to give you, and this is an extreme example, but I've done work for pharmaceutical companies, and when they're in the R&D development, they're not going to roll it out for 5 to 10 years. They're still coming up with the drugs. They will choose at least 5 marks, and they will file those 5. Not everybody has the deep pockets to do that, but pharmas will file 5 marks in their main countries, and it all depends what mark comes out at the end of the pipe that they have the least problems with in the most jurisdictions. That sounds extreme, but just to give you an example of how far in advance that they file their applications.
Okay, so now we'll take a step away from the war stories and the stuff that's truly terrifying everybody in here and go back to a warmer, fuzzier topic, which is brand identity. And I think, obviously, Ben, you're a person who can speak to this probably the best, but obviously Leif as well. You've gone through the soul-searching side of how do I find a brand that expresses who we are, and then, Leif, I think as well, you could obviously speak to guiding your clients through that process.
So I guess you said it there with who you are. That's the key there. So where you are and who you are is really key. For us, we struggled with, first of all, we didn't know where we were going to end up. So it was hard to choose a name until we had, set roots in a certain direction. And we did a lot of talk about who we were. It was kind of felt like it was like a group session. But in the end, there's going to be certain people who are better at expressing it and thinking about it. So in our group, I was the only one who was able to, be sort of working before we opened. So I got the job of doing the branding and the identity, and threw out a bunch of different ideas out there, and we sort of wove this path of going all over the place. And we had come to a name, which thankfully we did not use because it was terrible. And we basically just were so exhausted by the process that we just settled on a name that we could all agree on. Never do that. You can't really compromise with your identity, and it has to be on, or people will see it as unauthentic. Being authentic is probably the best thing that you can do for your brand, and like Andina is right up there. It's exactly what they are. For us, our brewers from Squamish, we all had the common theme of loving the outdoors, and yeah, I can tell you guys the name that we were going to be. It's terrible. It was Massif Brewing. Does anyone know what a Massif is? It's a big rock. And the chief is a Massif. And it always, if you have to explain what the name means, it's not the name to use. But the other thing about identity is that you do the best you can to set your path and your course and your identity that you can communicate to people. But don't be afraid to change, because that's just normal. And we started out with, names that Hired Guns had helped us come and choose. And then we went in kind of a new direction with funny names and pop culture references. And I was kind of upset because, hey, I'm the marketing branding guy, and these brewers are just coming up with these crazy names that don't even fit on the can. And I wrote on the whiteboard where we put our names, and I said, like, stay on brand, dude, guys, come on. And they erased that. And and I was like, okay, well, touche. And
then you released Stay on Brand IPA.
yeah. Great the longest beer name in the world. Yeah. But the identity is everybody in your business, and there's new people that join you, and they are there to help you be yourself and figure out who you are. So keep an open mind. Don't be afraid to pivot. Look at what Twin Sails did. They were a German-style brewery for a while, and so don't get too worried about being set in one direction, because it's the beer world. You're allowed to do some fun stuff. So hopefully that helps.
Nice. In terms of how we help clients figure out that identity that they need, it helps a lot if we can meet the people. So Ben was talking about who you are and where you are, and that's totally it. If we can meet the people face to face, the projects tend to go smoother. And sometimes we have clients where we can't. And so in that situation, a Skype video or some sort of video chat is the next best thing. But we learned over a few years that projects where you only ever talk on the phone and email, they're rough. They're always rough because you just don't get a sense of the person that you're working for. I mean, you get a bit of a sense, but you don't get the same as if you're in the same room with them. Also, site visits are very helpful, but with startups, it's tricky, right? It's a nice warehouse you got. It doesn't tell me a lot about who you are or who you're going to be, right? I had been to Squamish before, so I had an idea of that town and whatnot. So if you're struggling with a design company, go see them if you haven't. I find that helps a lot. Also on the naming, it's naming, I find, is the one thing that we do that everybody thinks they can do. Some of the design stuff we do, some people think they can do, and some of the crazy illustration stuff we do, a few people think they can do. But naming, everybody thinks they can do that. And if you've been through the process, you know that it's hell, especially if there's multiple people involved, and especially in today's competitive landscape. So I know it seems like a strange thing to spend money on, but it's a good idea. Hire a pro.
Which leads me into my next question, which is brand and beer names. Obviously, you talk about the whiteboard, you talk about trying to reach consensus. Any more insights into the excruciating process of coming to that consensus on picking a name?
So now we just have one person picking the names. It's the brewer. The brewers get to decide. It's their beer. The marketing department doesn't have anything to do with it. It takes a load off me, right? It's not fun. I've named a few. I got to name Dead of Night, which was cool. Basically, you're always your days and you'll find yourself in an elevator or a shower thinking of a beer name, listening to someone, but all you're listening for is a potential beer name. And I have a list. I have a list of maybe 300 beer names. Just keep keep rolling with them, and I guess for us at the brewery, we try to get as many people's input as we can, and then at the last minute we change it. That's basically how it goes. If you guys are on YouTube, on our channel, there's a little documentary, and it has a good part on beer names and how we come up with them. And I think it's one of our brewers, Sean, who's got the mullet dreadlock. You might have seen him around. He'll be here tomorrow. He comes up with a lot of our names. Somehow he's got it all down. And I think he says we get drunk as fuck and something else, and we sit around drinking tons of beers, and then we come up with the name. That's how we do it.
There you go. Get out the whiteboard and just get creative. It's actually funny you say that about the list of 300 names on your phone, because that's something I've heard from a bunch of people in the industry. Is they're constantly writing down names. They come to them at different times, and then they just draw on that well. So I want to make sure everybody has time to get to our keynote, and then we can wrap up. So I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to open up to all of you, and this is a question I'm really interested in asking, and I think everybody here is going to be interested in getting the perspective of a marketer, a brewer, trademark agent, and a designer on this. So I go into Quantland and I do my classes, and I'm talking about trademarks, and I'm talking about registration, and I'm talking about making sure you do all your due diligence. And someone puts up their hand, they're like, "What about Lord of the Hops?" And I'm and so what about the fact that people in this biz, there is a proven game plan of brewing a beer that infringes on one person's intellectual property rights and then replacing it with a beer that infringes on someone else's intellectual property rights, being Lord of the Hops to Snap, Crackle, and Hop. And the whole concept that this beer is such a limited run, why should we worry about this? So I'm interested to hear your three perspectives on the whole process of knowingly infringing on someone's intellectual property rights as a kind of
should go last.
branding play. Yeah, you can go last. Yeah.
You want to go for it?
I'll go for it. So when this sort of thing started to happen a few years back, I really, really was against this. I run a business that creates intellectual property, right? And so at our core, we try not to infringe on other people's intellectual property. But I've sort of come around more and more to the idea over the last, 3 or 4 years. There are certain things that this model can do. It can benefit a brewery if you take this approach, right? You can definitely create a bit of buzz around a product on social media. Joe Public, they love this stuff. They think it's hilarious. If you keep doing it over and over with these small batches that are one and dones, you can start to build a reputation as a fun-loving brewery, giving the finger to the man, and all of this kind of stuff. It does, in my opinion, it can have a bit of a negative impact on your brewery's perception. It depends on who the person is that's and how they're perceiving you and all their values and all that stuff, right? So, I don't know.
For the record, Ben is throwing goats over here. I don't know if anybody can see that.
I missed that.
He's totally grooming on this. He's just sorry.
I think if you're going to do it, be clever about it. If you're going to say a thing that is someone else's IP, maybe don't say it directly, say it indirectly, both with the name and the artwork. A couple examples in the last couple of years that I've really liked for this come out of Twin Sails with their Goodnight Sweet Prince and their Birdman. Those two beers I thought were really good pop culture references that said a thing without saying it, And also a nice benefit on those two is that if you have no idea, if you don't get the reference, you're not turned off necessarily, you know. Yeah, anyway, those are two examples that I thought were really good. But normally it's not a route we recommend.
Yeah. Yeah, Goodnight Sweet Prince had to be one of the best pop culture reference cans. Very limited release, and very few people would get it.
That's right. And if
But-
you didn't, it still looked like
Yeah.
a coffee beer.
But if you did, it made you so happy just to look at that can. So, Ben.
Yeah, so I think all of our names in the last year have infringed on somebody else. 36 Chambers of Tangerine. We got Wu-Tang on our ass right now, but that's kind of what keeps us going. We're we're on our toes. Thankfully, I won't be the one to blame for that because I can't remember any movies or actors' names or. Yeah, I guess we're trying to name a beer. Right now, we're doing a collab with Boombox and Twin Sails, and we're trying to come up with a name. And we sat down and had some pizza and beer. And Callum Huntington, our one of our brewers, was coming up with some good ones. And I think we got shut down by Twin Sails because they thought it was too close. The beer name was going to be Fluffy. I think someone else in the States had a Fluffy beer, but none of them were referencing the three-headed dog that we were talking about from Harry Potter. I still think we should do it. Leif thinks no. But, it's kind of like that Birdman where it's like, you see a three-headed dog, and then it's called Fluffy, That's like, you could see that, and it would be like, even if you don't get it, it's cool. It's a three-headed dog. There's 3 breweries, and, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we're going to do it. What do you guys think? Should we do it? We don't have anything else that's good. That's our reason for doing that.
There you go. You heard it here first.
I'm going to start with the obvious answer that you're all expecting me to say, which is never, 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 never infringe on someone's intellectual property. So that's my disclaimer for our firm. And then I'm gonna
Thank you. Now we're going to turn the mic off. Just turn the camera off. Okay.
we're going to go into the cone of silence. And if you're going to do it, I agree with what Leif says. You've got to be creative in the way that you do it. That's number one. Number two, you got to own it. If you're going to infringe somebody else's intellectual property, be prepared to pay the piper. Be prepared to get a cease and desist letter and excuse my language, but don't be an ass about it and try and point the finger at somebody else and say, you didn't tell me. You're going to do it, own it, and be prepared to get that letter. I've got clients that do it all the time, but they're clever about it. And not that I'm, here to tout Chip Wilson at Lululemon, but he's pretty good at skating the line. You can skate the line really close, and you can make your point without infringing somebody's intellectual property. And you might have remembered when the Olympics were on, they did a sweep of the city, and they said anybody who had the 3 rings or was playing on the Olympics. So Chip Wilson thought about it, and on his front store, the storefront on 4th Avenue, he put all these sweaters. And they were all the colors of the Olympics, so they were like the red, the green, the yellow, blah, blah, blah. Then on all the zippers, he had colors installed, so he had bronze, silver, and gold. So he clearly was projecting the Olympic image, but there was not one single piece of intellectual property. You know the story?
No, but
There wasn't one piece of
what I'm
intellectual
talking about.
property that the Olympics could point to and say, you've infringed this, we're going to give you a cease and desist letter, and you've got to stop. So there was this big news story, there were cameras, and it was like, here's what Chip Wilson is doing. And it basically, as Leif said, he was giving the Olympics the finger. And they said, well, their official response was, you have infringed the spirit of the official marks. And of course, everybody in the intellectual property world said, there is no spirit. You're either infringing it or you're not. So I use that as an example of, as Leif said, be creative about it, and don't just go head on and take somebody's mark and think that you're just going to do it for a limited amount of time. And also, if you get a reputation for doing it, then they're going to show a pattern of behavior, and that's going to work against you. So think about how you're going to do it and kind of use those examples where you're not taking somebody's exact mark, but you're conjuring up the image of, you're making your point without actually skating right across that line and getting a cease and desist letter.
Okay. So what I'm trying to do here as a good lawyer is to give everybody the tools to make the decision themselves of whether they're going to do this. So these guys have given us a pretty good indication of making that choice. What if things go sideways and you do get that cease and desist letter?
Yeah.
Ben from the beer industry, Trisha from the legal side, and Leif from the design side. What do you do then?
Sell it real quick and it's done. with these beer names that we do, we 100, 200 flats, and that's it. So if we get that letter, it's probably already too late, and we're kind of done at that point. I don't know. Do you get in trouble for doing that?
Well, that was
How bad is that?
the short answer is you could, and again, it goes back to whether or not you've got a pattern of that style of behavior. But yes. Because somebody's ultimately going to take you to the mat for it. Because really, if somebody owns a trademark, their end game is to get you to stop using their mark. And if you do that like that, then they've achieved what they want. Because they're not going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to chase you if you stop using the mark. You're no longer infringing the mark, and it's done and it's over. So I'm not here to counsel people on how to infringe intellectual property. However,
Can I have a question?
there's some merit in what you said.
Okay, so say one of our beer names, this one, 36 Chambers of Tangerine. How bad is that? I mean, it's
Well, it's also too. It's like, who's coming after you? Like Wu-Tang's coming after you.
I mean-
that's. I'd rather have Alex Trebek coming after me than
or
Wu-Tang.
or how about taking a line out of a movie? That's not a knife, and then the double
Yeah.
IPA. This is a knife. Is that? I mean,
It's better because it's not a registered trademark. They could come after you for copyright, but it's not the best. Whenever you're borrowing somebody else's ideas, it's not the best.
we never saw the movie though.
Oh,
As I
this is
said, I'm
great.
not here to counsel everyone
Yeah.
on how to
No.
infringe intellectual property.
Yeah, we really should have made everybody sign a waiver, make it clear we're not providing legal advice here, especially to you, Ben.
It also
bill for that.
depends what you're infringing. Like if you're taking somebody's house mark and you're messing with it, then there's going to be a bigger problem. If you knowingly did it and you've got a pattern of doing it, yes, there's obviously going to be a problem. But short, sweet, in and out, I mean, some of the founding cases in trademark law are all the beer companies. Molson, Labatt's, Budweiser. When you go back and look at the historical cases that we all use in our arguments, they are the big beer companies. They were the ones that, framed and created, the structure for a lot of some of the concepts in intellectual property. So, long before there were craft brewers or the popularity, these big beer companies were fighting tooth and nail over their marks. I mean, no disrespect to the big beer companies, and I'm not necessarily a connoisseur, but long ago, if you had like Budweiser and a whole bunch of other beer sitting in front of you, the only way you could tell the difference was what trademark was on it, right? Would you agree?
Very true. Very
I
true.
have one little thing to add. Before we opened our brewery, I was sitting down with Matt Phillips, and he was. It wasn't the best timing because he was being sued by Labatt Blue. He was in town for the case, and I was being a little shit trying to open a brewery, and he was giving me some advice. I think I was trying to sell him some hops too at the same time. But anyways, basically Labatt Blue was suing him for copyright infringement on Blue Buck, infringing on Labatt Blue, and it was done basically just to slow them down and cost them money, because there wasn't really a strong case.
Yeah, and there's some trademark holders where there's that one buzzword that's really going to get under their skin. And Labatt Blue is one of them. They tried to corner the market on the blue. I mean, there's other companies like Tangerine. Their whole marketing is around the color, orange. I mean, UPS. You see somebody in shorts and they're brown, you think they're delivering a package. So I could go on and on about trademarks and when you see things. So color is a big buzz, in industry. Leif, you can probably talk about that.
Well, this was what I was about to say was that, so you asked what happens when we get the C&D letters. Well, we don't. Ben does, or our clients do, right? So, however, we did get one when we were starting out. We did a vodka label design, and then it ties into the color thing, where it's for a distillery in Nanaimo, and we built prototypes of the bottle and wax dipped it with a red wax on the top, and had pictures taken. And then he used that to help with fundraising and get the distillery going. And we put it on our website because we're awesome and look at what we did. And then we got a letter from Maker's Mark. The distillery had not published this product yet. We were the only ones that had, and we pushed it onto all these design blogs that we could find. And the cease and desist was very nice, but what it came down to was they had a trademark on drippy red tendrils of wax. So we immediately wrote them back and said, look, it's a prototype. We'll redip it and shoot it for you. Here, are you happy? And like, yeah, we're happy. So, but yeah, we don't get the letters. Ultimately, our clients are the ones that make the decision to go ahead with stuff like that. We try and steer people away from IP infringements usually, and tell them to ask their lawyers about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, to sum up, be careful, do your due diligence, be mindful. And when you see a beer that says everything's coming up Millhouse, just drink it out. Just drink the whole supply out. Help out Ben. So thanks, guys. Thanks for coming today. And I want to thank the panel, Ben, Trish, and Leif. It was very illuminating.